Welcome to another episode of Business Raw, where we collect raw success and raw stories of entrepreneurship. And today I've got amazing guest with me, Matt Gilmore. Matt and his background will fascinate you, and his story is definitely one for you if you want to understand more about risk factors, how actually you're navigating risk, why taking risk is important, or actually understand how to manage it. Matt, huge welcome.
Thank you, Julia. Absolutely delighted and flattered to have been asked to join you.
Yeah, when you were completing my guest form, you stated that currently you are director and owner of Haven Advisors Limited, which has or doesn't tell us much really.
It's not supposed. It's not supposed to. It's a front, Julia, for retirement. If you actually asked me, outright on the street what I do for a living, I would say I'm retired. But I do some. I stumbled into a couple of consultancy roles, and I use Haven Advisors for that.
Brilliant. And looking back, I also know that you set up, or how you started and reached your point of retirement, which, by the way, I think dream of many entrepreneurs. And I'll dive deeper into that as well, how you get into that stage. But your background is mortgage lending. So that's your was business that you set up in 2003 and another one in 2005. And both, of course, were victims of global financial crisis, which led you to close them down. So let's dive into that. I think, starting financial business, it's not something that probably you sit on a sofa and think, I would love to start a business, what that will be. And let's start financial services or lending business. So tell me more about how it's all, I guess, launched, how you came to that point in your life.
Well, I know you're no stranger to financial services yourself, Julia, so a lot of what I will say it will be familiar to you, but I'll try to keep it digestible for your listeners that aren't financial services gurus. And if I go back a little bit further in time, when I was in my teens, I'd always decided that I wanted to run my own business. I don't think I could articulate to you why I wanted to run my own business, but I'd observed the founders of the outfit that my father worked for, and I just admired them. I liked, there was something about their lifestyle and what they did and the challenges that they faced that just appealed to me. And I think my very, very earliest recollection, I guess, of what I would now call risk is if you do set up your own business, if it goes wrong, what do you fall back on? So as I was going through my GCSEs and my A levels and my degree, I had decided in my infinite wisdom that I wanted to be a chartered accountant. And I went through that journey. I became a chartered accountant for two reasons. One is what my perception was that it would bolster my credibility when I was discussing with stakeholders, potential investors in whatever business it was. I mean, when I say any, I had no idea what that business was going to be. I went through a phase of wanting to be a chef. Went through a phase of wanting to be an architect. I went through a phase of wanting to have a cocktail bar. It almost, at that point in that age in my life, it didn't matter what it was. So I went through the journey to become a chartered accountant, which not only did I have a perception that it would aid my credibility, but also that it was a fallback, that if everything went wrong, I'd have something, a career that I could fall back upon. And I think that's probably that's the reason I went down that professional route. And my plan had been to, do my exams, get my qualifications and get out. And 7 years later, I was still within what was then one of the big six accounting firms, now big four. And I stumbled into, and I really did stumble into this because I was working in one of the regional offices of what's now Deloitte. And it was a very broad church, a very broad cross section of different client exposure. If I had been in the London office, I would probably have been a sector specialist or had a sectoral focus much earlier. But I had a very, very broad spectrum of exposure. Really interesting, from manufacturing to services to house building, and ultimately to mortgage lending clients. And the particular office that I was in became the epicenter of looking after what we now know and identify as non-bank financial services companies. So not institutions that take savings and deposits in order to lend out to consumers, Rather, we would borrow wholesale on the bond markets and through investment banking facilities.
So it's kind of behind the scenes, right? That's what the kind of the analogy that I can use. So it's not consumer banking, it's banking behind the scenes.
It's not consumer banking in the sense that it was taking in people's savings and deposits, but it was consumer banking in the sense that I was lending to retail, lending to people like you and I for purposes of buying or refinancing their own homes. Albeit I went through intermediaries. I didn't have a branch network. I was known as a centralized lender. I've just got a head office, and I interface with people like you and me that want a mortgage loan. I would go through the broking intermediary community. And it was through becoming a sectoral specialist within Deloitte for centralized non-bank lenders that I sort of cut my cloth, for want of a better way of putting it. And needless to say, I got to the point where I thought I knew everything. I spent a couple of years after Deloitte in the city with a credit rating agency, again, very much in that space. A lot of my Deloitte clients were also my Fitch clients in the city. And then I took the plunge. I thought, I know too much about this. I've seen everyone that would be my competitor if I were to set up my own business. I know how many underwriters it takes every one of my lending competitors to change a light bulb. And I felt I had an awful lot of knowledge. At one point, probably a little bit uncomfortable in having as much knowledge as I did of my then would-be competitors. And I took the plunge. And while I was working, had a full-time job, I was evenings, weekends, furiously up till the wee small hours, going through analysis, writing business plans, building financial models, building pitch decks. I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea about how to go out and raise money. So, now I know full well that you have a teaser, a 4 or 5 page teaser, if that, you go through the right networks and have the right advisors with you to get that teaser out in front of the right people. But oh no, I had my 300 or 400 page business plan that I just carpet bombed private equity with. And actually, I got lucky. I got very, very lucky in the end. But I was very green and naive. And it was only when I left the profession or left professional services that I realized how little I really knew. And that was 2003 when I set up my own.
Kind of the start of your journey of entrepreneurship. I love what you've done there. Like, you ultimately have done a huge marketing research against your competitors, talked to them one-on-one, like you said, spotted the gap, and created a product or service that actually can do better than anyone. And also what really stood out for me, we talk about risk, and that even when you were like much younger, when you said you were at the crossroad of your, career, you really want to be in entrepreneurship. However, you already mitigated the risk and said, I'm going to get a profession so will have something to fall back on. So your mindset already was in that way of managing the risk and putting the cushions for yourself along the journey. And I wonder whether that's, I'm fascinated by your story. I wonder if that's actually the theme going forward. So I think also listening to you, what I'm gathering, like being an accountant and understanding money, understanding the numbers is like an empowering position to be. And from experience working with many business owners, if you never had that background, or personally, you maybe not, like math is not your best, forte, that can jeopardize a lot of, I guess, your business, your decisions, and also what directions you're taking. And my question to you, like having that knowledge and understanding, being comfortable around numbers, big numbers as well, what did that do for you and your business? Compare, let's say, to other people that you probably talk to, and entrepreneurs.
You've picked a subject matter there that is very dear to my heart, particularly when I'm talking to other business owners. And I don't put myself out there as being a mentor or a consultant to friends and family, but I do get a lot of people that are delighted and flattered again that they do come and ask me, and it never fails to surprise me how a lot of people don't understand the finances of their business. And I'm in a very fortunate position that I do. Not only was I founder and CEO of my businesses, I was also the CFO. Ultimately, it depends. When you're setting up your business, you are either going to be a one-man band, or you are going to end up taking on employees, taking on staff. And that's a whole different kettle of fish altogether. When you do take on a team of people, you are trusting them. And you are, by virtue of hiring people, you are taking a risk because you will live and breathe your business. To the team that you take on, as great as they might be, as great as their CVs might be, it's a job. To you, it's so much more than a job. And one of the things I've always prided myself on is I've always tried to have a go at every role or every aspect or every function within my business. I've done sales, I've done credit underwriting, I've done fundraising. And what that means for me is it gives me a little bit of a window into the job that I am expecting and hoping that they will do. Now, and if I had all the time in the world, I might do some of those jobs myself, but I don't have all the time in the world, and most entrepreneurs don't. So therefore, you have to hire people to fill the bits that you don't have the time to do. And you hope that the people that you take on to do those jobs are going to do a better job than you would be able to do. But having an awareness of what they're supposed to be doing mitigates the risk of having the wool pulled over your eyes. And the risk of the wool being pulled over your eyes is the most prevalent in your finance and accounting function. It is where, if you haven't got even a basic understanding of what your business does and the implication it has on your bank account, on your P&L, on your financial statements, something can go wrong. And it's very often the thing that goes wrong can be incredibly damaging to your business. If someone gets marketing a bit wrong, well, you might not have as many customers or as much of a market reach as you hoped you might be. If sales go wrong, you'll see it in your numbers. You'll think, well, hang on, we should be doing better than that. If something goes wrong in finance and you don't spot that it's gone wrong, and you spot it too late, for example, you haven't submitted your VAT return on time. You haven't submitted, you've left something material out of your corporation tax return. Well, when that comes and catches up with you, it can bite, and it can bite pretty hard. But I think that the very, very I kind of touch on, having the wool pulled over your eyes. Ultimately, your accountant, your bookkeeper, your finance function, if you're not doing it yourself, the deliverable will be usually a set of monthly management accounts or a monthly snapshot of how did the last month go? What were sales? What were costs? What was bottom line? Whether that's coming from your bookkeeper or your CFO, it's a statement of your financial affairs for that period. As a business owner, I would encourage you, before you open that file, think to yourself, what am I expecting to see? If you understand your business, you will, I reckon, plus or minus 5%, you should know what revenue is for the last month. Plus or minus, you should have a pretty good idea of what your bottom line profit should be. Plus or minus a bit, you should have a pretty good idea of how much money you've got in the bank. And then compare, when you open the file, compare that to your expectations and try to figure out if there's a big difference, why, and start asking questions. You've got you haven't got nowhere near as much cash as you thought you had. Well, that's because a customer hasn't paid. Okay, right. Get on that. Get into credit control. Get onto sales. Get on the phone yourself. Chase that customer down. Get the cash in, because ultimately, cash is king. But things can go wrong that can have a very detrimental impact on your cash. And staying as close as you possibly can to the numbers, I think, is the most important function in your business that you need to have an awareness of, that so many people don't. And it's all very well having the best bookkeeper, the best accountant, the best CFO in the world. They can get it wrong. There's also a fantastic opportunity for corruption and fraud, fingers in the till, money going astray, money going missing. You read it in the media, you read it in the press all the time. And the business owner wasn't aware. Well, the business owner should have been aware, because they should spot the signs going, the bank balance isn't what I expected it to be. Why? And just ask the questions. Why?
I love that. Yeah, becoming aware of your business numbers, and each month before you look at your numbers, get a little talk with yourself, because yeah, like you said, we do know what we should be seeing. So, when you talk about looking at the numbers, because the numbers can come and bite you and you don't know what's coming and all that stuff. I know that you started your journey of entrepreneurship, set up your businesses, but then there was two, I guess, significant timings, 2003 and 2007, which we all know were linked to financial crisis. Talk me through about those times. How do you navigate being in financial sector as a business? Like, let alone it was tough for everyone around those times, but being specifically in that sector, what has been happening for you? And, I guess how you navigated that time?
Well, I think, when I set up in 2000, well, sort of from about 2000, I set up in 2003. We were living in a bit of a boom time and everything was going great. We had growth, we had positive outlook, the economic indicators were looking healthy and looking good. We were riding a bit of a crest of a wave. So arguably, I got into the market at the right time. So I thought. But of course, there was something brewing stateside in my sector. I am going to describe what I did as non-conforming mortgage lending. And I'm very careful with my words there. Non-conforming is I lent money to people that would struggle to find finance on the high street because they don't fit the bank's typical credit scoring automated jelly mold. And that could be for a myriad of different reasons. You're self-employed and you haven't got 3 years worth of accounts. You've only been in the country for a relatively short period of time, or not as long as the main high street lenders would want, or you've got a couple of little dents on your credit record, you missed a couple of credit card payments, or you could be much more severe than that. You could be a recovering bankrupt. And my job was to ascertain the circumstances of the borrower and then try to put them into a product that was suitable to them. And you might think, well, that sounds a bit like predatory lending. If my most recent lending business, I think when you could have got a mortgage loan from Halifax for 1.49% fixed for 5 years, I think my best rate was 2.99 fixed for 5 years. So we're not talking about 49.9% APRs that you see in some financial services sectors. But the corollary of what I was doing and what you would call it in the US was subprime.
Mm-hmm.
That was the bucket that you put it in. I was in the subprime mortgage industry in the UK, while everything in the subprime mortgage industry in the US was going very, very awry. I won't bore you or your listeners with all the details of that. It's very well publicised. Watch The Big Short if you haven't watched it. There are names referenced in The Big Short that I know, and I know who I know. I was very, very close to the industry at the time. I know what was going wrong. We didn't spot it. We didn't see it coming. It was the classic case of US caught a cold and we started sneezing. There was a read across. My backers and supporters were global financial institutions, and the emphasis there is on global. You've got a big problem going on in the biggest market in the world. It's going to impact you. And I recall very clearly, I think it was the 5th of August, 2007. I received a voicemail. I was about to go on holiday. It was a Friday. I was about to go on holiday on the Saturday morning. I was just clearing my desk. It's about 6 o'clock in the evening. I picked up a voicemail. And that voicemail was from the principal at the investment bank with whom I was banking, from whom I was borrowing money out of a facility of several hundred million quid with them at the time. And the voicemail went along the lines of, there's some stuff going down in the US that's got our guys are really a bit spooked. So we're not going to be able to lend you any more money with immediate effect. Anyway, I know you're on holiday next week. Have a good week and let's catch up when you're back.
Just like that.
Needless to say, I didn't go on holiday, but I didn't go into the office that week because I didn't want anybody to know. I literally sat in my then office at home, just trying to pick through how the hell to react to this. I had a pipeline of offers, of mortgage offers. When you go to your bank and you get a mortgage offer, you can bank on that mortgage offer, right? Because it's binding. I couldn't fund it. I had people that wanted mortgages funded the following Tuesday or Wednesday. I couldn't fund them. And I won't bore you with all the details. I managed to navigate a pathway through that, so that I didn't let all my customers down. But people that were in my pipeline that had sort of decisions in principle or had applications in that I was in, I had to send back hundreds of millions of pounds worth of business in buff envelopes. And I was the second fatality in our sector. The first fatality had been at the end of July, about 2 weeks before me. And then I hit the buffers at the beginning of August. And my second business that I'd set up in parallel to my first one also fell over at that exact same point in time. So I had to I was dealing with two businesses. I was the CEO of one and non-executive director of another, and had to navigate through both of those. And
you had team obviously at the time. So
yeah, I'd had,
what size team did you have?
between the two, I probably had about 160 people plus.
So you have to deliver the news to 160 people plus.
I've got to say, guys, is more emotional than I expected it to be. Having to stand up in front of your entire team and essentially say 95% of you are redundant with immediate effect is, yeah, I still picture it now. uh, it's one of the toughest things you could ever have to do. Because at the time, I wasn't a family man at the time. I didn't have a family. They were my family. They were my people. As mentioned earlier, you have to trust your people, because you can't do everything yourself. There was a point in, sorry, I got a little bit emotional there. There was a point in, it was February 2005. Cash flow was looking a bit tight. I put payroll on my credit card, my personal credit card. Because whatever happens, the last people that are going to suffer are going to be my team.
And how much love you had for your people, because you said one of the biggest risk factor in your business is your people. And if you don't have that trust rapport, if you don't support them, whatever, that's huge risk. So I can tell the way you were building your teams, the way you were operating in your companies, like people was essential key part to you and to your heart and what you were building.
Yeah, I mean, you try to find, you have a situation vacant, you have a role, you try to find on paper the best person, best people or peoples to fill those roles. But actually, at the end of the day, they are a human being, and you might have the most fantastically qualified member. You just think that person's just not going to gel with my team. Their face isn't going to fit. This isn't going to work. It's just going to be, like scraping nails down a blackboard. So when I was hiring, I was always thinking about, yeah, I need the right person for the job, but I've also got to make sure they fit into the team, because this is it sounds a bit glib, but it's a family, and people will come and people will go, but you know, classic cliche. There's no I in team. We were a team, and my business has since we've been a team, and you do your best to lead from the front. You enjoy the successes, but you've also got to go through the failures, and I've had plenty of those.
And like leading from the front, I think that's such a powerful phrase in your circumstances. You were literally at the front. You were at the front of 160 people plus to say, this is what it is, and I'll have to navigate this, and I'll support you, and I'll do my best. But then all in this, there was you, right? And you're also a human being. And I really want to dive into your mindset at the time, because like you said, from the moment you received that phone call, lots of probably thoughts were racing through your head. What does it mean to me? What does it mean to my business? What does it mean to my team? What does it mean to my customers? What does it mean to that deal? All those kind of questions that can't be unanswered in that very second. How do you deal with that? Number one.
Well, number one, panic. That's the first immediate reaction. Well, sorry, let me rephrase that. That was my first immediate reaction at the time. Now, I've had a similar, not quite analogous, but similar situation in 2019 where I chose to close a business. And I think the reason there was 2007 was a surprise. 2019 was deliberate. In 2019, I could plan. I knew it was coming. It was on my terms. I could plan what that looked like. But the big difference, and this is kind of the thrust of this session, thrust of the session is I was risk naive in 2007. I overcompensated as a consequence of that throughout the rest of my career and became incredibly risk aware. So when things went wrong, they were A, less of a surprise, and B, in some instances, I had mitigants in place. And in other instances where it's not possible to have mitigants in places, at least it wasn't a shock. Because risk, it's a funny thing. I believe there are two different types of risk. There are risks that you take that you are aware of, and there are risks that you take that you are not aware of. And in 2007, I was taking risks that I was just blissfully ignorant to. I just wasn't aware of them. in 2019 and now 2026, I probably overcompensated. Invariably, I'm thinking, I used to be a glass half full guy, but now I really sound like a glass half empty. I'm actually not a glass half empty guy. I'm a pragmatist.
Mm.
In the sense that throughout all the battle scars that I've got over the years, the successes and the failures, and we're talking about a lot here about the failures. For some things go quite well. Hence I'm retired, but whatever I was, 46, I think I was when I retired in 2019. I think that the preparedness, the more prepared you are, and the less of a surprise it comes to you, and the more of an arsenal of mitigants and backups that you have, will influence how you react. So I didn't have any mitigants or backups in 2007. So it was just like, rabbit in the headlights, panic. And it's literally that. It's just panic stations. First and foremost, look after the team. Second, look after customers. Stakeholder management. It's just looking after all the stakeholders and communication. Just, how much how much do I want to, how much should, and how much could I tell the team? Because some of it you kind of think, I kind of don't really want everybody to know everything. You kind of got to pick through the bones and think, well, look, I want to give enough that they understand what's going on, but not so much that it becomes tricky in the sense that you've got too many plates spinning. So I think, a long-winded answer to your question, Julia. I think that the preparedness that you have to face that scenario will influence where you sit on the panicometer, whether you're at kind of 2 or 3 on the panicometer or you're off the scale at 10 or 11. And I had both of those scenarios.
And in your first scenario, so you kind of like understood, like the first thing was panic, right? Then you, like I can clearly see you divided, I need to manage my team, I need to manage my stakeholders, I need to manage my customers, and I need to communicate. I need to give them enough to, I guess, make them to understand. I think that's that's a great insight, because when all of a sudden you have to deliver those news to either category of those people, the first thing, they will be asking questions themselves in that, right? They will be resisting, they will be hating you, there will be lots of negative emotions. But once they understood where it was coming from, I guess that's provided a little bit of calming approach, reassurance. They might be still not happy, but at least like the emotions not alarmed and high. So like communication and making them understood, but giving them enough so it's not raising further alarm bells or further questions or putting them in a state where actually they can't move on. And I think that's skill in itself. Personally, I guess I can relate myself in that situation when I went through COVID in my business.
Yes.
And have to navigate investors because every investor panicked. And there was a number of phone calls that we had to make as well, and give them enough information to reassure. But at the same time, myself, I was panicking, like I didn't have crystal ball. Nobody knew what's going to happen, how long it's going to last. But you have to be there, present, and demonstrate, I guess, your ability that whatever's going to happen, you can handle it. You've got it one way or another. What the outcome is irrelevant, but you can pull yourself together and not panic and be present. And basically you can deal and face those problems.
I think what you say there, Julia, is right. But what prepares you is experience. It's the only thing is on the job experience. There's no training course that you can go on of how to deal with catastrophes and crises. You have to you got to navigate it yourself, and the way that the effectiveness of how well you navigate it is based upon your experiences. So if I fast forward to 2019, where I deliberately chose to close one
Tell
of
me
my
about that.
businesses.
Why deliberately choose? Like, what was the decision behind that?
So I'm going to segue a couple of threads that we've touched on already. It kind of comes together quite neatly for 2019. So we talk about risk, and we talk about awareness of your business and the sector in which you reside, and look at the backdrop and look at the macroeconomic influences on what it is that you're doing. Look at what your competitors are doing. Look at where your edge is, where your USPs are, unique selling points, what makes you different to the other guys, why your customers use you over the other guys. And what I detected in sort of the lead up, 2018, 2019, I was a little bit narrow in my bandwidth of the sector of how many customers I was able to reach. So I kind of wanted to broaden it out. So I ended up having kind of three different bits. And without going into too much detail, there was kind of like massive segment of customers that were only just outside of high street criteria. Huge segment. I wasn't in that. I had, my traditional people that would struggle more, that needed a little bit more rigor and to help them out. And then there was some buy to let. And I was never a big fan of buy to let. I'm still not a big fan of buy to let, but I had horses for courses, and I had three individual segments with very different dynamics, different routes to market, and I had funding lines. I had one funding line here, one funding line here, and a funding line here. And I thought, right, okay, I've now got a much bigger net cast out across my universe of potential target customers. And it means that, if the market ebbs and flows and moves around a bit, I'm in every bit, and my mix might change, but broadly I'm okay. But I detected that the standards, what I would call underwriting standards or credit standards, were dropping, and pretty fast. And it was the backdrop that had happened in the lead up to the global financial crisis in 2007, particularly stateside. There was a poignant phrase used to describe the mortgage market in the US at the time, which was ninja lending. Is that they were so desperate to get money out the door, they would lenders in the US would lend to people with no income, no jobs, and no assets. Ninjas. We never got that bad in the UK, but I saw that there was a trajectory that it was a bit of a race to the bottom. We want volume, we want more product. We got this, investors have got a demand for all this product. We've got to print new money. And to do that, credit standards were dropping. And I thought, I'm a credit guy, fundamentally through and through. I'm a credit guy. I don't like where this is going. And I looked at my three funding lines, and I looked at the mix that I had. And I realized just how much business I needed to do just to break even. And let's take away back to the numbers bit that we talked about earlier, Julia, is one of the most important numbers that a business owner has got to know. And if they do not know this number, they are destined to fail. What is your break-even point? If you're a coffee vendor, how many cups of coffee do you need to sell to break even? Not to make money, not even to pay yourself, but to cover your overheads and cover your costs. It doesn't matter if you're manufacturing, how many things do you need to make? One of my sort of pastimes, semi-pastime, semi-businesses, I chop down trees and I make posts and beams. I've got a sawmill at home, and I make posts and beams. How many trees do I have to chop down and sell, and at what price, in order to cover my costs? If you don't know the answer to that question, you're in trouble. Because when you're starting out, you start out at zero, and then you're going to build up. Well, and how achievable do you think that is? And I looked at my business, and I was probably running at about 300 or 400 million quid a year of production. With this particular box of tricks that I had in front of me, I needed to do £1 billion a year to break even, not to make money, £1 billion a year, which was about 2.5 times what I was actually doing.
Really?
And if I wanted to do £1 billion a year, because I was trading on very, very thin margins, because it was very competitive, I had to drop my credit standards. Now, I saw what happened when credit standards dropped in 2007, thinking, to do the same thing again and expect a different result is insanity. And I just thought, this doesn't feel comfortable to me. This doesn't feel like something I can believe in. And this kind of touches on something else I think about your entrepreneur. Whatever it is that they do, whatever it is you choose to do, I think you need to be passionate about it. You need to believe in it. I remember there was an analogy when I was 18, 19 years old. I did a summer break in the US doing door-to-door selling. Oh my God, door-to-door selling. No, absolute hatred for door-to-door selling. But the product, this is before Google Maps, was aerial photography. And the team would go up and they'd take photographs of neighborhoods with 100 houses on it. And you go door to door to say, I've got a picture of your house. Would you like to buy one? I thought, there actually isn't any other way of selling this. This is before social media and Google, and it was a novelty. And I thought, actually, you know what? I don't like the way it's being sold. I don't like door to door, but I actually quite believe in the product and that this is appropriate. You got to, if you're not passionate about, ultimately, if you're an entrepreneur, you're selling something. If you're not passionate about the product and you can't put 110% of you behind it, it's going to be an uphill struggle. And that's where I got to in 2019. It's like, I just don't believe in this anymore. I don't like this sector. I don't like the direction it's going in. So I was able to box that up and communicate that message to my team when I sort of went in again, sat with then 75 people in front of me, a sort of town hall meeting, as we would now call it. I said, guys, I'm afraid I've got some unpleasant news, but I was able to frame it. And so, and neither 2007 nor 2019, I don't feel like, I'm sure there are probably one or two exceptions, I don't feel like I came away as the bad guy. 2007 was just going, well, the bad guys are in the US. We're reactive here. But even though I had personally made the call in 2019 to close the business, I didn't get the sense that I was the bad guy because I was able to package it up in a way and explain the rationale. And people would go, all right, I don't like what you've just said, Matt, but do you know what? Respect. Completely get it. Understand. And I'm not going to say that was necessarily any easier, but at least at least it was planned.
Yeah, you had. I guess you had time to yourself as well to digest, think through, and work out your reasonings. And you know what?
Yeah.
I love what you just shared here. And you talk about the breaking even number, and you worked it out. Basically, in my terms, you worked it out how much it's cost you just to wake up, and you worked it out. It's costed you £1 billion just to wake up.
Well, that's how much I needed to sell or create to cover my cost base.
Yeah. And so, like you said, and then the question is, do I really want to wake up and put all that effort just to make that money, not even profit, just to cover my costs, and I guess that's where you had to be honest with yourself. Do I have passion for this business? Do I have what it takes now to take to that bigger level? I'm sure you're capable if you could do, but do I have that energy? Because it will require a whole load of new energy to do it. And
I think, remember, until you get to that break even, you are by definition losing money. So where's that money coming from? You need to put more of your own in, or you need to go and find investors. Well, trying to raise money from investors when you're losing money and you've got a break even point that's a long way out, that's looking a bit sketchy as to whether you can achieve it or not. It's not a slam dunk. It's not as if you can show that, I'm growing at 50% a year. Aren't I great? I'm wonderful. Guess what? People will jump on the bandwagon. We've got the SpaceX IPO, in our in trays at the moment. Yeah, it's Elon Musk. Yeah, he builds stuff. He's got a great track record. Yeah, a bit easier for Elon to raise money than it is for the average guy on the street, average girl or guy on the street that wants to, set up their own business. Yeah, track record goes an awfully long way. People like to back winners. And until you can demonstrate you're a winner, it's really hard. It's really hard raising money.
Oh, absolutely. I agree. And, trust is a huge element here. But, I want to ask you this question. So you obviously built that business. You took it to really high level in terms of like numbers, turnovers, team. You said you worked out your 3 core sectors. You can cross-reference all of them. Looking at it back now, what one thing that I guess maybe you didn't oversee in the whole process to then get to the point of 1 billion breaking even point that you maybe didn't kind of like worked out at the start? But like, looking at that back now, where would you say, like, what was the blind spot, right? We all got blind spots in our business. What was the blind spot?
I think to paraphrase the question, make sure I've understood it correctly, it's like, I think you're saying, if I did it all over again, what would I do differently?
Yes. And would you, because like, you obviously had success, right? You were selling your services, big numbers, team, whatever. But then even with those big numbers, it didn't stack up. It's like to break even is £1 billion, which, a huge amount of money. So there was something along that production line that you didn't took into the account, like where was the blind spot in all this? Was it like lower margins? Was it the cost of services was high? What would you say?
Yeah, yeah, okay. I get where you're coming from. I think competitive forces, because ultimately I was trading on thinner margins than I would like to have been trading upon in order to go after the volume where the big ticket volume was at a very low margin, and it's at a lower margin than my business could deal with. So I wasn't as automated as perhaps others were at the time. Um, I prided myself on understanding my customers' circumstances and finding a product that would fit their needs rather than having my own automated jelly mold that the high streets used, but just dialing down some of the criteria to or make the holes in the net bigger. Use the same kind of systems and technology that the high street used, but just dial back some of the parameters and to allow more customers to fall through bigger holes in the net.
Mm,
And I think, and ultimately, the competitive tensions and the competitive forces drove down margins.
mm,
And my cost of funding was the way that I had funded myself was high. If I had been able to produce those volumes and I myself had been a bank, I might have approached it slightly differently. But being a bank, very, very high initial setup costs.
mm,
We certainly explored the notion of getting a banking license. Many have done it before, several have done it since. It's not the holy grail because the initial setup costs are so high, and it pushes the break even out a lot further. But in the meantime, you do have a lower, broadly, I won't go into the complexities and too much detail, but broadly, in the long run, you would end up with a more sustainable, lower cost of funding, less volatile. And that's something that I could have done differently. But I think it was thinner margins.
mm. And then, the following question: what influences you or influenced you at that time to adopt that strategy? We talk about risks, and you said now you really like not risk. What did the phrase is? Not risk.
Risk aware.
Risk aware.
Risk aware.
I guess what made you to adopt that strategy at that time? Because you knew that there are really thin profit margins. You need to have volume. You decided, yeah, let's go at it. I've got this. So what was, I guess, the factor at that time, the influencing factor for you to take the decision?
I think if I'm really honest in answering that question, it was familiarity. It's what I knew. And I think, I allude to, going down the banking model. I was an awful lot less familiar with the banking model, but I certainly got myself up the curve because we did explore it with quite a lot of vigor. We kind of bottomed it out. We even looked at buying a couple of banks to reverse our business into. So we got to understand the sector. But ultimately, and this kind of goes another to one of my kind of recommendations or pieces of advice to a wannabe entrepreneur, is it's very, very difficult to do anything as a generalist. So you're more likely, sort of big statement. I think I'm going to make this statement. I think I believe this at least 80 to 90%. I think it's very difficult to be a generalist. You need to be a specialist in what you're doing to have a very detailed knowledge of what you're doing. I always maintain that in order to explain something complicated in basic terms, you've got to know it and understand it extraordinarily well. Otherwise, you're going to flail around and you won't explain anything to anyone. And I was and I was a specialist in in not being a bank.
Mm.
It would have been a foray into an unknown world with unknown risks, and I would have needed to bring in people to bolster the team, and they would be doing jobs that I was less familiar with. And as I mentioned earlier on in the conversation, I kind of pride myself on, I've done some sales, I've done some credit, I've done some underwriting, I've done some systems development, I've done some marketing. Not necessarily particularly well, but I've got an understanding of how that works. In the bank world, I'd be flying a little bit blind. And I think it was almost better the devil you know,
Mm.
because of that familiarity.
And would you say that again links back to your risk approach?
Mm.
Like you said, going to be becoming a bank, it's would have been taking the risk to go into unknown territory, and also becoming generalist, like you said, and then having people and having support. Again, you're not as 100% as other market.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right.
Mm. I can see.
That's absolutely
I
right.
certainly can see like a theme with you in terms of how you like approach your businesses, and like how you thought through risk factors. What stacks. But in all this, I know for sure now it's definitely a theme for you that you were always putting cushions for yourself.
Yeah, and well, I certainly learned to put those cushions in place as a result of 2007, 2008. And now, in my consultancy advisory roles, I work closely with a fund or a big investment that they've got in the UK in banking and financial services. And it's been absolutely fascinating. And I think one of the things that has been really, really interesting to me is, as a non-executive, I'm actually I'm described as the shareholder representative, to all intents and purposes, chairman, for in lay terms, and I'm not immediately close to the coalface. I'm a step removed, and one of the reasons that we described me as shareholder representative rather than chairman is a chairman ordinarily sort of turns up um, to a quarterly board meeting, reads through board papers, asks a couple of questions, and then disappears and comes back again in 3 months' time. That's just not me. I needed access all areas. I needed to be able to go and stick my beak into anything that I wanted to stick my beak into, understand it better, to understand the risks, and be able to properly advise, recommend, suggest, discuss, debate the issues that the business was facing. And and not being at the coalface meant I wasn't as emotionally involved. And I think this is another big risk factor for the wannabe entrepreneur or the startup entrepreneur. If you're going to do your self justice, you're going to throw yourself at it 110%. You're going to make sacrifices. You're going to make sacrifices to your loved ones. You're going to make sacrifices to your family, to your friends, to your social life, to holidays, to trips away, to nights out. You're going to be letting people down. I was going to come out for a drink with you tonight, but I can't because I've got to work. If you're going to have half a chance of making a good success, you're going to have to make those sacrifices. And you become very, very personally involved. If you've got a team of people, you become incredibly emotionally involved and emotionally attached. And I think that is a necessary evil. And if you're not, I think you should question whether you really are passionate enough about what you're doing. But the corollary of that is you cannot see the wood for the trees. You can make emotional decisions rather than practical or pragmatic decisions. And I really noticed that difference of going from CEO and front man leading from the front to a non-executive advisory kind of almost observing from a distance. It's like, I'm going to make much tougher, harder decisions because I'm not emotionally involved. Now, I know the guy, my MD, chief executive, he's the one that's going to go and have to deliver those messages. It's not going to be me. But I understand what he's going to have to go through to make those calls and make those decisions and explain it. And I'm there to kind of help him do that. But not being emotionally involved enables you to make better decisions. So what's the upshot of this? the upshot is, and this was not something I was ever particularly good at doing. I wasn't the best at listening to other people. I kind of wanted to do everything my way, which is, yeah, when people started coming and telling me what to do, it did cause some interesting heated debates and arguments. But having some trusted advisors in the background, I'm not talking about friends and family, I'm talking about people that have been there and done it, whether it's an advisor, a consultant, a non-executive, a sounding board, a shoulder, someone that has been there and done it and got some battle scars, that can say, look, honestly, Julia, everything you've told me, you've got two choices here. You can either do A or you can do B. Doing what you're doing at the moment is not getting you to where you want to be. And I know you don't like A, and I know you think B's more painful, but B's probably the best thing to do. I'm here to help you through that. But actually having that voice of reason rather than just carrying on. I mean, I think one of the problems of entrepreneurship is you don't know when to throw the towel in. Don't know when to say, do you know what? This isn't working anymore. Because one of the things that we haven't touched on, we've talked about, having, or in my case, having a career to fall back on if it all went wrong. Your entrepreneur has probably given something up. It's probably given up a job, and that job provided a certain lifestyle and provided a certain level of income. And you're going to sacrifice that level of income for a period of time until such time as you get to your break even and you can start, paying yourself some money and paying yourself properly. So many people just carry on losing money, not earning, going into debt, living off credit cards, and they just carry on too long. And that's why I think it is so important to know where that break even point is. Have a plan as to when you think you're going to get there. And if you don't get there in the time frame that you thought that you were going to get there, reflect, sit back. If you've got a trusted advisor that can help you sit back, relax, take a chill pill, put a cold towel over your head, let's look at what's going on here. You didn't hit your break even. You're not there yet. It's close. Carry on doing what you're doing. It's just taking a bit longer. Great. That's a great answer. It's a long way off. You're nowhere near. In the meantime, your margins have dropped. You've got more competitors in the market. You either need to change something or you need to pull the plug. And that's a decision that the entrepreneur will find incredibly difficult to make on their own. I pulled the plug in 2019. I did make that decision on my own. It was helped by virtue of the fact that I was going to have to invest quite a lot of my own money alongside my other share. My other shareholder said, "We'll carry on backing this, Matt, as long as you back it pro rata with us." I'm going, I'm not passionate. I don't believe in this anymore. So I was able to make that decision. I mean, I did have other people in the background. I had my, investors behind the scenes that were kind of backing and supporting me. But ultimately, it was my call. But you need to know when to pull the plug.
I love that. I think that's such insight here, and I would call it business compass navigation, right? And that's your option A and option B. Sit down and have a look and review option A and option B. At what point you will be breaking even, at what's your clear plan, what's your direction, how long it's going to take, and have those specific milestones. And if you're not achieving, like you said, be honest with yourself. Actually, have you chosen the right business? Do you have all the skill set? Do you have all the support? Is it better, like you said, stop and maybe start again, something different? Now it's a lessons. It's not failures. And like I always say, there are no failures, just lessons. But yeah, be honest with yourself. I love that. That's such, I think that's incredible pointer for business owners out there, because we are also navigating a little bit more and just a little bit more. I need a bit more time, little bit more customers, little bit of this. It's all real, but actually to have those moments, have someone trusted advising you and being non-emotional absolutely is the key. Well, thank you so much, Matt. I really enjoy this, and I hope all of our listeners were drawing some wisdom from this one way or another. And let's say if anyone would love to have chat with you, or maybe would love to have you.
The trusted advisor.
Is it
I
open for people to reach out, or would you suggest for them to look for someone within their network?
I love chatting through people's businesses, and I love helping them navigate through whatever stage of their business they're at. But I'm sure 99% of your listeners, I'm not going to be the specialist, but I can be the generalist. Asking, I don't necessarily know the answers, but I'd really, really like to think I can ask the smart questions and the really awkward questions. And I think that's what your advisor needs to do, is not be afraid to ask you the really awkward questions, the questions that you really, really don't want them to ask, because you're going to have to give an answer that you don't want to have to admit to yourself. And it's so important to have those people around. And I'd be delighted. Anyone that wants to have a chat one-on-one, yeah, would love to do that. I can't help myself.
Yeah, and what is the best way for people to reach out to you?
I think probably the easiest is to reach out to yourself, Julia, and you put us in touch.
Fantastic, good stuff. Thank you so much again, and it's another great episode of Business Raw.
Thanks ever so much, Julia. Really appreciate your time.